Hello, good morning, and welcome to this second session, this second webinar on the learning on the ESPON TIA tool. In the name of ESPON, thank you for your presence and your interest in this second webinar. My name is André Henriques, and last time, I will going to assure that all your technical issues and your questions and answers during the webinar will be solved. So before we start, and because we might have new participants that could not attend the first session, I will quickly go through the instructions again. So you can join the webinar through your computer. If you face any issues with the audio or your microphone or something, you can also use your telephone to call the webinar and join by phone. As you know, this is a live webinar, so we are not going to be able to answer technical questions during the webinar individually, but we invite you to try to restart your browser if you face any issues, or try to check your computer speakers if you can solve it directly. Otherwise, you can try to use your phone as I mentioned. So as it happened during the first webinar, we are going to have the possibility for you to ask questions to the presenter during the presentation, but also during the questions and answers by the end of the webinar. So at any moment, you can raise your hand or write any questions in the chat group, and I will assure that your question is transmitted to the presenter, so you can address them directly. So this webinar is going to be recorded and shared with all the registered participants after the end of the webinar. And by the end, we are going also to share a feedback form for you. For those who already filled the first time, you don't need to do it again. But for those who could not do it after the first session, please, we kindly ask you for 2 minutes of your time to provide us with your feedback. So thank you and welcome to this second session. So now we know that some of you have tried during this last couple of days to access the platform. Right now, all the technical issues are solved, and if you want to access the online tool, the ESPON TIA online tool, you can do it now. You just need to contact ESPON, and they will provide you with the user and the password that you need to access the tool. So today with us is again Mr. Bernd Schuh as the expert on the TIA tool that is going to present this webinar. Today we are going to focus on the presentation of the practical application of the tool in the previous workshop environment and how the results are shared with all the participants. And that's all from my part from now. I will give the floor to Mr. Bernd Schuh, and he will start his the presentation of this second webinar. Thank you very much, and welcome again.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'll just wait till my camera is focusing. Yeah, there we are. Okay, good. So welcome back from Vienna to all of you who have attended the first session. I was very happy with the first feedback and the first session after all, so I hope you also enjoyed it and you took away with you the practical applications of the tool as it is. Today we are actually, as André said, we will not concentrate anymore on the technicalities of the tool and the setup of the tool itself and the method behind it, but I'm going to show you examples of what we did in the past in terms of practical applications of the TIA TIA QuickScan in the environment of legislative proposals and more concretely in the framework of the impact assessment procedures of the Commission itself. So I'm going with you through quickly through some examples, and to as a reminder from last session, just let me briefly again go a little bit into the steps which consist in which the TIA web tool consists of. As we said, we start off with setting the frame, with defining the systemic link, so to say, of any legislative proposal we will have at hand in an ex-ante situation. So the TIA quick scan is used in the circumstances of checking a legislative proposal with respect to its territorial impacts in an ex-ante way, building an agreed and substantial part in the overall impact assessment procedure as foreseen by the Commission itself. And in order to do that, we follow actually really, as I explained on the last webinar, we follow in principle 9 steps. But to cut it short here, in principle, we start off, as I said, with creating a systemic picture of the circumstances and of any causal chains and cause-effect relations the legislative proposal or the piece of legislation at hand will have on a region. This is then translated into indicators in a limited set of indicators which try to depict these cause-effect chains. Then on the basis of these indicators, the experts participating in this TIA workshop are then producing judgments on the extent, let's say, of this exposure through the legislative proposal on the regions, which is then through the tool itself translated into impacts on the basis of the situation in the very region, the so-called sensitivity of the regions themselves, which then heads into maps, which are then produced, and all this step is then leading through to a policy discussion in the end, and a conclusion and recommendation discussion, which is then in the end formulated around a report, a reporting scheme, which is then fed back to the participants on the one hand, and then feeding into the legislative proposal itself, and therefore building a part of the ex-ante assessment of or the impact assessment of the legislative proposal. I will quickly go today through to show you really and to give you a flavor what this really means, what this in practice has meant. I will go through a couple of examples, all from last year, in a chronological order, as a matter of fact, how we applied the TIA quick check in a set of legislative proposals which were all discussed last year. All of them, I can assure you, except for the last one, all of them are already now concluded, meaning that all of these legislative proposals have passed the scrutiny board. This means that they are already now in the process of being discussed with the Parliament, and are actually about to become actual law. So this means that apparently the role that the TIA quick scan played in these legislative proposals and in the impact assessment itself was deemed as relevant and sufficient to help along decision making and to actually help along the legislative proposals themselves. So the first example I give you, and please be aware of the fact, and you will see that the real charming aspect of the tool itself is, as in any decision-making tool, is that the application or the bandwidth of possible applications is really large, actually. So it's very exotic topics we were dealing with. The first one, for instance, was on the directive on port reception facilities for ship-generated waste and cargo residues. This means, of course, that this directive was kind of regulating, or is regulating, the disposal of waste from ships, all kind of ships, cargo and person transports, including also, for instance, cruising ships, and how their waste actually is supposed to be treated in a unified way by all ports all around Europe, actually. This should prevent, in principle, in the end, it should prevent that ships are getting rid of their waste on sea, and that the waste is actually treated according to the regulation of waste treatment, and is produced and is treated in a way that it can be either reused or it can be, let's say, processed in a safe way. As I pointed out, the first step was, okay, creating these systemic pictures. I won't dwell here into details because, I mean, this is really very technical what we had. You can also see here that we had quite a number of indicators identified capable of depicting actually these the effects which were produced by the directive itself. Showing that apparently, even though the topic is very specific and very, let's say, even exotic to a large extent, there is sufficient, let's say, data background in the tool itself to cover these effects. I give you just one example of these indicators that they were using. This was the indicator of tourist intensity, saying, okay, yes, the directive as it is will certainly have effects on the tourist intensity on the regional basis, where, of course, there is a lot of anxiousness by the, for instance, cruising ship owners, saying, okay, yeah, well, if we now have to separate waste and bear additional costs for getting it treated, of course, this will reduce our passengers and so on and so forth. So in principle, there was a very interesting debate about that. And you can also see here one functionality of the tool, which is very important, is that you could distinguish between different type of regions, because the experts were deeming that, for instance, in coastal regions, this indicator would have a different, let's say, exposure than on islands, for instance. And you can see that by the different weights the experts have put on them. So we had 15 weights in 15 votes in general, and 6 of them said, okay, in coastal regions, this would be a strongly advantageous effect for tourist intensity, actually. Whereas on islands, it was not so clear. There was even one disadvantage effect identified. This led to, in principle, a very nice map. On the one hand, the map created for the type of regions on the coastal regions themselves, where you can see, okay, clearly the more tourist intensive, of course, or the more touristic the region or the coastal region is, like in Greece, like in southern Italy, parts of Bulgaria, the effect would be, of course, the total impact would also be accordingly higher than in other regions. Picking out actually the weak advantages judgment on that. If you take the island case, then it's even more striking that, of course, clearly, and here we have strong advantages case picked, that, of course, the more touristic islands, like in the Greece, Aegean islands, Crete, Sicily, and Sardinia, they are really probably benefiting the most because of course, a clear improvement of the environmental situation in these areas, and therefore, of course, the intensity of tourist intensity would also increase enormously well, while other islands will probably not benefit that much. But in principle, what it shows is that it's very helpful here to even differentiate among very small territorial types, like islands, for instance. And you can, of course, in the tool, not only produce maps like this, but you can also zoom in and zoom out in order to identify more closely which regions are actually met. Second example I will give you is the completely different thing, development of a minimum quality requirement for reused water in agricultural irrigation aquifer recharge. This is kind of a very technical piece of legislation prepared by actually the DG Environment in strong, of course, cooperation and relation with DG Agri, which calls for a certain minimum quality when you reuse water. Take, for instance, water from a water sewage treatment plant, for watering your plants, for instance, for using it in agricultural stuff, but also in pumping it back again into the aquifer environment, and waiting, of course, there to have a cleaning effect in the groundwater, and then use it again. So this is a highly technical thing, but on the other hand, it is, of course, highly relevant for a territorial differentiation. We see that, and I just give you here one example on the judgment on the pollutants in soil and ground and surface water, which shows a actually very nice differentiation if we take the judgment of the experts as strong advantages. So if a minimum standard like this would be created, they deemed it as actually a strong advantages effect on the single territories with respect to soil and groundwater, ground and surface water quality. And you can see that sure enough, there are specific type of regions which will benefit much more than others. And this is I picked this picture because it breaks up this usual, let's say, core periphery idea about regional development in Europe, because here you can clearly see that the underlying, let's say, condition in terms of sensitivity is determining what kind of effect would be to be expected in which kind of environment, showing clearly that, of course, in the southern regions, you have a higher, stronger impact if there is improved water quality, but you find it also in some northern regions, and less so in large parts of Eastern Europe. So this is something which clearly shows that even for other let's say specific environmental conditions, you could find here an appropriate differentiation of effects. The more let's say familiar picture arises if we take then the field of government effectiveness, which also was deemed as a relevant consequence from the minimum standards, because of course in due course with all the this regulation, of course, then government effectiveness and government quality will also have to be improved. And here, of course, it is more rather an east-west divide, which we observe, and then also a south-north divide, where the biggest, let's say, marginal improvements were to be expected in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. Next directive I want to show you is the Clean Vehicles Directive. Again, completely different. Was initiated actually by DG Move. Is actually more, although it seems a very environmental topic, it is actually not. It's very much a directive for public procurement issues, regulating in the future the public procurement of communities, municipalities, and public bodies with respect to the acquisition of clean vehicles. Here you can already see this. It was with respect to establishing here a causal chain and thing and systemic picture, was really a challenge of really defining the systemic borders of this issue. Because I mean, the biggest problem was in the first place to define, okay, what is a clean vehicle? It sounds trivial, but it's a very technical issue, especially here we have the problem of lots of regulative differences all over Europe on the national and regional scales. That, for instance, in Eastern Europe, there is no problem in deeming, for instance, diesel fueled vehicles as clean. Whereas in Western Europe, especially in some parts of Germany, Austria, this would be actually a complete no-go. And here, of course, the idea of a clean vehicle starts with a Tesla and ends with, I don't know, some electronic vehicles or self-driving vehicles. So we had to bridge here, of course, the problem also of the technicalities. Okay, what is really to be understood here? And following that, we can then define more closely, okay, what would be the effects. I show you just one result example here, which was kind of obvious, of course, the NOx emissions per capita, which were judged, of course, as being strongly advantages in terms of developing through this directive. Although, of course, here we had, of course, the strong debate about is this, and this is the big caveat in all these maps, of course, is this really depicting an absolute improvement, which is going to happen, kind of a crystal ball effect, where you can say, okay, yes, around Madrid or around in certain parts of the Czech Republic, yes, the NOx emissions will certainly go down, which is of course complete rubbish. This is not the intention of the tool. The tool just gives you a vague direction, saying, okay, there will be certain types of regions in Scandinavia, in Spain, but also in Central Europe, which will most likely benefit, without saying, okay, yeah, well, the benefit here is in absolute terms larger than in the neighboring region. No, that's not possible. So you just get a direction. You say, okay, there is a likeliness of certain regions benefiting more than others, and this direction is actually the one which is relevant for the policy discussion, and not so much whether in Paris or in Praha these NOx emissions will really go down. This cannot be actually depicted and is not intended through the tool in the first place, absolutely. Last example I will show you is the directive on work-life balance. This is the last. This is the only example which didn't yet actually really go into the let's say legal procedure of really an ex-ante assessment. This was conducted under the auspices of the Committee of the Regions, whereas all the other three examples I've shown you were actually conducted within the framework of DG Regio and supported by DG Regio there, even though the line DGs were responsible for the ultimate impact assessment. This one was a first discussion on the directive, but it didn't lead yet to introducing, let's say, the impact assessment process by any line DG here. So therefore, of course, it was also more a vague concept, of course, although it is quite clear that the work-life balance directive comprises actually, again, in a way, this is a little bit a misleading umbrella concept, because in reality the directive covers actually minimum standards for social security issues like paternity leave, maternity leave, and leave of sickness without with a payment and a return to work actually afterwards. And this is therefore kind of was a little bit a problem of, again, finding the systemic borders here and really catching all the causal effects, of course, then for all of these aspects, which are rather heterogeneous. I again pick out just a couple of the judgments, which was interesting to see. Was the first one was on female employment, where there was kind of a unified vote that there would be a strong positive exposure to the regions due to this directive, which leads then to a rather clear-cut, again, core periphery, let's say, picture in the consequences, where we have the European core regions and especially some member states with very clear-cut and high social standards already, with, of course, less marginal impact, rather than other member states with a higher, with a lower social standard. We can here clearly see that any social issue in terms of legislative discussions is, of course, highly depending on national legislation, and therefore, of course, what you can see is that clearly also in through the sensitivity and the ultimate impact, the member states, the state level is really kind of popping up more prominently than in any other analysis we did so far. The second example I want to show you is the poverty exclusion, where we didn't have such a clear unified vote, but a distinction between weak and strong positive exposures there, but leading also, if I take the strong advantages, nonetheless, leading as well to a clear-cut differentiated picture. But again, the member state level again rather pops up rather prominently in this case. So to conclude, I give you just some things, some glimpses into the future. What actually the tool is going to see, and as I mentioned on the first webinar, the TIA quick scan is far from completed. What I've shown you is nonetheless very practical examples of the tool as it was actually. Till, let's say, last year. In the meantime, we have developed quite a bit the tool. It has now a very, let's say, streamlined procedure. We were stepping down from 9 steps to currently just 4 of them. So, and it's now getting new features in terms of the indicators themselves. You can now directly get into the votes. You can change the votes simultaneously and see what the mapping is changing, how the mapping is changing. You as I said already in the last webinar, you have the chance now to differentiate the normalization mathematically. And what is even more, we are introducing now 2 more portals, TIA portals. The first one is on urban TIA alone, so meaning that we are basing now a TIA on only urban regions with a differentiation along functional urban areas and core cities. We are then also having established already the TIA portal on the cross-border regions, with, again, of course, the major discussion point, what exactly is a cross-border region? Because here we have to a little bit follow the interest of the client, saying, okay, well, for us as in terms of territorial aspects, of course, a cross-border region are regions on either side of borders, right? So physically there, which is not true if you take the political perspective into account. And then, of course, stakeholders like DG Regio, of course, would say, no, a border region is a region which is part of a cross-border cooperation program in Europe, which does not necessarily mean that it's actually a border region. which again in due course then causes a lot of methodological problems. How do you then depict, for instance, relationships between these regions? So this is what we are fighting now with, and this is what we are setting up now. But nonetheless, I think in the end we will have these 2 portals established. Then what is really important to be really underlined 3 times, I guess, is that, like in any decision support situation and in any tool, the principle trash in, trash out has to be taken care of. This means that the preparation of where and in which circumstances you apply the TIA quick check is to be very importantly and very carefully, let's say, considered. The preparation of the workshops is the paramount issue. You have to ask the right questions, so to say. Meaning you have to be very precise in defining, okay, what exactly you want to check through the quick scan. So, like, for instance, one really bad example was that we were requested, for instance, to say, yeah, well, go ahead and test, for instance, I don't call here any names, but test the effect of any macro regional strategy we might imply or we might adjust. Just check. I mean, first of all, it's impossible to say, okay, well, you have to break it down then by, okay, what kind of thematic orientation you want to have checked. And if you want to check, then of course you have to develop something like scenarios and say, okay, yes, good, yes, I check actually on one change, on one potential change of this strategy. This you can do, but you cannot say, okay, just check several options. Because for each of the options you have to be aware, you will have to conduct an own TIA, because you have, of course, differentiations there, and this, of course, brings problems. The same holds true if a directive or if a legislative proposal is formulated in a two-way way. I mean, we had this example, for instance, in the problem of the directive on the circular economy. Circular economy is a so broad theme that, of course, depicting it in one go in terms of territorial effects is a suicide mission. Therefore, we had actually to conduct within the TIA workshop a pinning down of the topic, and then only conduct actually the TIA on a very precisely defined scope of the directive. And last but not least, the most important point is, of course, that the data quality which is underlying the TIA tool is another important issue. And here, this will be a work which will be going on forever. We know, as we know that the aim of the TIA tool and the scope of the TIA tool as it is, and it will stay like this, will be NUTS 3. Which makes absolute sense in the term of the analysis of a territorial impact. It still is nonetheless posing the problem that data availability on this small territorial scale poses problems. So therefore, sure enough, we are in constant negotiation and dialogue with any data provider, starting from the European. From Eurostat going over to the GRC and others, and the Director Generals on the different topics. But in principle, of course, this will be always to be adopted and updated, and it will always be a living thing. And you cannot consider that actually the quick scan as it is right now will be in a, let's say, in a final version somewhere, because you will always have this issue of constantly refreshing and updating the data quality in the background. That was all from my side in all briefness, so to say. Together with the Tuesday session we had, I hope I have provided you a good overview now of how the TIA Quick Scan is actually working. And I also hope that I provided you with some, let's say, encouragement to use the tool yourself. But as I said, and as this last slide here shows, be careful, of course, with the limitations and also the circumstances in which you can use the tool itself. Yeah, I do thank you for your attendance and for your patience with me. And yeah, I'm of course here now for any open questions you might have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bernd. Thank you for your presentation and for showing us these concrete examples of the application of the tool. So we would like now to open the space for the questions and answers from the attendees. If you have any question that you would like us to see answered right now, please just raise your hand on the right side of your screen, or write your question in the questions option. We have just one first question from one of the participants, which is more technical ones. We are going to share the notes and the presentations from the seminar. Yes, correct. So we are going to, so the seminar in first place is being recorded. So we are going to share with you the link so that you or your colleagues can see the seminar at the webinars at any time. And yes, also for the PowerPoint, we are going to share them in the page of ESPON, in the page of the event. It will be available for you to consult. So I don't know if we have any other questions from the floor. Okay, we have one question. No. Well, from my side, what I need to also highlight, I said in the beginning, but maybe not all of you were present yet. So if you want to assess the online tool in the ESPON website, you can already contact us or follow just the instructions in the web page to get granted your access, your credentials, like username and password, to try it and to explore it a little bit. And if you have any difficulties or any issues that you want our help, please just also send us an email and we will try to help you on that. Bernd, I think we don't have any further questions. Do you have any final comments?
No, it's all right. I mean, apparently I talked everybody into sleep, so that's okay. That's fine. And yeah, no, from my side was really a pleasure. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm here anyway for any open questions. The same as ESPON, I think is always there. If you have any let's say direct requests on the tool itself, always happy to help.
Okay, thank you. So if you don't have any more questions for the moment, we were going to finish this webinar. We would like just to ask you, if you didn't have the chance in the first webinar, after the first webinar, to fulfill the feedback form, please do it after this one. It will automatically pop up when we close the webinar. If you already did it in the first time, is okay. You don't need to do it again. Thank you, Bernd. Thank you all for your presence and interest in this webinar. We are going to just next activities on the TIA tool. We have planned a training in Lugano in June this year. So in the website of ESPON, please check it regularly. You will be able to see further details of this activity. It will happen in the beginning of June. And also we are planning another session of this e-learning around September later this year, right, Bernd? So please pay attention to the ESPON website, and you will have further information if you are interested in these following activities. And that's all from my side. Thank you all, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.